Good afternoon. Laws of Prayer, Mishnah Berurah, Kuf Ches Yud Aleph 108:11. So what happens if on Shabbos Mincha, last time we talked about you forget to daven at Shabbos Mincha, but what if you forget at Shabbos and you daven a regular Shemoneh Esrei? You daven a weekday Shemoneh Esrei on Shabbos Mincha, and then Shabbos is over and you realize, what do? Do you go back and do you daven two marvs? Now, what are the two sides of this coin? We're going to see. On one hand, you davened, but it was a weekday Shemoneh Esrei. So really, you missed a Shabbos Shemoneh Esrei. So maybe it doesn't count, and you should do a makeup Shemoneh Esrei at Marv. However, on the other hand, what's the makeup Shemoneh Esrei going to be? The makeup Shemoneh Esrei is a weekday Shemoneh Esrei. So what are you gaining? The Shemoneh Esrei you missed was a Shabbos Shemoneh Esrei. So you already davened a weekday Shemoneh Esrei for Shabbos, which you shouldn't have done. So now Marv comes along, you're going to daven a second makeup Shemoneh Esrei that's a weekday Shemoneh Esrei. So how does that help you? So let's see what the Shulchan Aruch says, and we'll see what the Mishnah Berurah says. Talba Mincha shel Shabbos v'yispal Shemoneh Esrei. You Mincha on Shabbos, you forget that it is Shabbos, and you pray a weekday Shemoneh Esrei. V'lo hiskir shel Shabbos, and you don't mention Shabbos at all. Mispala b'motzei Shabbos shtayim ve'ena mavdil b'shniya. So Saturday night, you do daven twice. We'll see why. And you do not say Havdalah in the second Shemoneh Esrei. So your first Shemoneh Esrei, you do Havdalah, you do Tachon and Tanu. And the second Shemoneh Esrei, you don't, because that's a makeup for Mincha. V'yispala osa b'toras nadava. But we're adding a caveat here. You should daven your second Shemoneh Esrei that makes up for Mincha as a nadava, as a voluntary Shemoneh Esrei. Ve'en tzarich l'chadash b'davar, and you don't have to add anything new to the Shemoneh Esrei. So we'll see in the Mishnah Berurah what that means exactly. But we're seeing that it's some sort of middle ground. Okay, let's see. Mishnah Berurah says Lamed Beis, B'motzei Shabbos shtayim, yesh b'zeh machlokes. There's a debate in this case. Hatosas b'Shemri, Svira lahu de'ein tzarich la'achzor b'shvil zeh. They hold if you daven a weekday Shemoneh Esrei Shabbos Mincha, you don't have to go back and say it again. You don't have to go back. Dakvar is Pal Shemoneh Esrei. Rak sheshachol shel Shabbos. You daven Shemoneh Esrei, you just didn't mention Shabbos in your Shemoneh Esrei. And now when you do a makeup and you don't mention Shabbos, how does it help? You already davened a weekday Shemoneh Esrei on Shabbos, so now you're going to daven another weekday Shemoneh Esrei, so who cares? Like, that doesn't do anything. That's the opinion of Tosfos. The sages of Provence, they hold, he says, no, the fact that you davened a weekday Shemoneh Esrei on Shabbos, Mincha, it's like you didn't daven at all. Kaven shelo asa kedin, since you did the wrong halacha. Va'al kain, therefore, hechriu apoiskim, sheyachzor lispal b'toras nadava. So they hold, you do have to go back. So now we have a debate between these two groups of rabbis. If someone davens a weekday Shemoneh Esrei Shabbos Mincha, do you go back and daven again? So we do the famous middle ground to compromise both opinions, like we've mentioned many times. You do a nadava with a tanai. Demashi is Pal Shemoneh Esrei below Shabbos, Havi Ki'ilo is Pal Klal, Kevin Shelo Asa Kedin. Va'al Kain, Achriya Poskim She'achzor is Pal B'toras Nadava, Ve'ein Tzarich L'chadesh, Kevin She'yesh Svar, She'tzarich L'achzor is Pal Mitzad Adin, and Chidush Gadol Mizeh. We'll explain what is a Nadava with a Tanai, something we've mentioned. Let's read it. B'toras Nadava, Hainer She'asna V'yamer, Im Chayvani Harei Ze L'chovasi, V'im Lav Harei Ze L'Nadava. So you do like this. Since we have two opinions, you daven the weekday Shemoneh Esrei Shabbos Mincha. So now Marav, do I do a makeup? So we have a debate between two groups of rabbis if we have to go back and daven again. So you do like this. You daven Marav, you say Havdalah and Marav, and then you daven another weekday Shemoneh Esrei. But before you daven, you make a condition. You say, if I'm required to daven again, and we hold like those opinions, let this be for a tashlumin. And if I'm not required to daven again, let this be a voluntary Shemoneh Esrei. Right? Well, there's such a thing called a voluntary Shemoneh Esrei. So that is the middle ground of how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. So we are worried for both of these opinions, so we do daven again, but we make this condition that we just mentioned. And this is what you do anytime there's a debate if you have to daven again. Anytime there's a debate, you make this condition. You say, if I'm required to daven, let this be for my requirement. If I'm not required to daven, let this be a voluntary Shemoneh Esrei. But it has to be that it's really a debate between two groups of rabbis, right? Not every debate in halacha is going to be like this. Sometimes you might have 100 rabbis versus one rabbi, so then you don't have to do this. You just go with the 100 rabbis. Lo yachid neged rabim, v'lo katan neged gadol. Right. Also, if you have a great sage who says something and you have a rabbinical student who says something else, you can ignore the rabbinical student. Va'az dine kemo b'safek im ispalel. Le'el b'sim kuvzayin alf Shabbos v'yant. Okay. So again, but every case is specific. Call the rabbi if you're not sure, if you haven't seen it explicitly. But that's the general rule. Anytime there's a real debate amongst the rabbis, if you have to daven again, you make this condition. U'b'Shabbos v'yantiv, ein mispal tefillah safek, de'ech yasne, de'ein mavin dava b'Shabbos k'le'el b'sim kuvzayin. He mentions what we said earlier, that we only do this condition during the week. We don't do it on Shabbos, because on Shabbos, just like you can't bring a voluntary sacrifice in the temple on Shabbos, so too you can't daven a voluntary Shemoneh Esrei. So this eitzah, this advice, only works during the week. Let's say, okay, another case. Let's say you forgot to daven Motzei Shabbos. You didn't daven Saturday night. Mispal b'yom shtei tefillah. So Shacharis you daven twice. Achas l'chova v'achas l'tashlumin. One, the first Shemoneh Esrei is for Shacharis, and the second one is a makeup for Marav. Okay, so far so good. Now, v'lo yomar atachon antanu. But you don't say Havdalah. Alfo pi shelo hivdil. Even if you didn't make Havdalah yet, he says you still don't say Havdalah. So you might think that since you're making up for the Marav Shemoneh Esrei, and in the Marav Shemoneh Esrei Saturday night, you usually say Havdalah. So you might think that you should say Havdalah in your makeup Shemoneh Esrei and Shacharis. The Mishnah Berurah says we don't do that. Right? Especially since Saturday night you probably said Havdalah on the wine anyway. But here he says that even if you didn't say Havdalah on the wine, you still would not say Havdalah in Shemoneh Esrei. The Dirshu here brings a Ber Halacha, if you want to look it up, in Siman Reish Tzadi Daled 294, that says if you didn't make Havdalah, then you would say Havdalah in Shemoneh Esrei. An example of that would be when Tisha B'Av is on Saturday night. Okay. Because of Magen Avram, this time of the Magen Avram doesn't understand this din. It was said for Magen Ibarno, hit the gastam umina was Elishono, afilu adayin lo hivdil, ein sarach lo ma'atachnan, kevin shechayev lahavdil, to take the tashlumin the davar sheish lo takana, v'kevin she'atachnan yish lo takana b'avdala, ein that tashlumin. He says really, the Magen Ibarno says the reason we don't make Havdalah in the makeup Shemoneh Esrei when we do it Sunday morning is because you can always do it in another way. You could make Havdalah on a cup, and there's no reason to be inserting it in the Shemoneh Esrei. It's something which is called Yesh Lo Takana, and anything as a Takana we don't mention in the Tashlumin of Shemoneh Esrei. Okay, so just to summarize what we said so far, if somebody accidentally davens a weekday Shemoneh Esrei and Shabbos Mincha, he should daven 2 Shemoneh Esrei Saturday night, but in the second Shemoneh Esrei he should make the following condition. He should say, if I'm required to daven a makeup for Mincha, let this be my makeup. If I'm not required to daven, let this be a voluntary Shemoneh Esrei. And we also learned, in most cases, that if someone forgets to daven Saturday night, when he davens 2 Shemoneh Esreis Sunday morning, he does not mention Havdalah in those Shemoneh Esreis. Wish everyone a beautiful day and a beautiful week.